Assalamu alaikum, peace be unto you, and of course, Ramadan Mubarak, greetings of a blessed Ramadan. I am Zaheer Ali, Senior Fellow at the Pillars Fund, and I'll be host for this evening's conversation, Processing Grief in the Age of a Pandemic and Beyond, with psychologist Dr. Kameelah Rashad and filmmakers Aman and Zeshawn Ali. This program is part of Pillars' pop-up conversations, an ongoing series designed to highlight the ways American Muslims are using imaginative storytelling and cultural production to advance social change. Every Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time during Ramadan and a little bit beyond, we will be gathering on Facebook Live with Muslim activists, storytellers, story changers, and others to learn more about their work and how we can all make a difference. Next week on May 14th, we'll be having a topic, Reimagining Community, Muslims and the Fight to End Mass Incarceration with Camilla Pickett, Sana Ali, and our own Kalia Abiade. And then the following week, on May 21st, we will be having another program called Storytelling as Healing, Poetry, Reading, and Conversation with Omar Effendum and Arij Mikati. And then after Ramadan, on May 28th, so we're extending our series a little bit due to our popularity. We'll be having a great program called The Role of Art and Artists in Social Change with Kashif Sheikh, our own ED, and the poet and writer Hanif Abdurraqib. And then finally, the last one we have scheduled for now, and it's probably not the last you'll hear from us, but this one is also a special one on June 4th. We will be having Rami from Pen to Screen with Arij Mikati. Rami Youssef, the Golden Globe winning star of Rami, which will be having its second season premiering around that time, along with writers from season 2. So we encourage you to follow us on social media, tweet using the hashtag Pillars Pop-Up, and of course, post your comments to the Facebook live stream. Near the end of the program, we'll invite questions from the audience. So if you have questions, post them. Before we begin, for those of you who aren't familiar with the Pillars Fund, we are a foundation working to amplify the leadership, narratives, and talents of American Muslims. Pillars staff is responding to this public health and economic crisis by working closely with grantee partners as they navigate the shifting terrain and supporting individual community members. In doing so, Pillars has announced a fund, now in its second round, for Muslim artists and activists who are experiencing economic constraints brought on or exacerbated by this current moment. So please subscribe to our mailing list and follow us on social media to receive updates as they are announced. Now for tonight's program. As we struggle to cope with the loss of life that the coronavirus pandemic has caused, our communities, while apart, have strived to come together to forge forward in hope. We are honored and grateful to be joined by our guests tonight to explore the ways our community can healthfully confront and learn from this current moment. So I'd like to introduce our guests now, starting with Dr. Kameelah Rashad, who is a psychologist and founder and president of the Muslim Wellness Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting healing and emotional well-being in the American Muslim community through dialogue, education, and training. Through Muslim Wellness Foundation, Dr. Rashad has established the annual Black Muslim Psychology Conference, which is like, you don't want to miss that, and the deeply rooted Emerging Leaders Fellowship for Black Muslim young adults. Her clinical and research areas of interest include mental health stigma in faith and minority communities, first-generation college students and emerging adults of color, spirituality, religious identity, and multicultural issues in counseling, healing, justice, and faith-based activism, racial trauma and healing, the psychological impact of anti-Muslim bigotry and anti-Blackness, Black Muslim psychology, and Black Muslim intersectional invisibility. So like, if this is the person that we pretty much gonna have Kameelah on for a few episodes, I think, because there's a lot that I think she can bring, and we're especially happy to have her for this conversation. Joining her are Aman Ali, who is an award-winning storyteller in New York City and one of the most engaging social media personalities in the Muslim community today. You should follow him on Facebook to get a daily, regular dose of his insights and humor. He has traveled to all 50 states and 27 countries and counting to tell stories on stage to hundreds of thousands of people worldwide. He's made media appearances on dozens of outlets, including the New York Times, CNN, BuzzFeed, NBC News, and HBO, to tell stories about American Muslim narratives. Joining him is his brother, Zeshawn Ali, who is a filmmaker and director based in Harlem. Originally from Ohio, he graduated from NYU's Tisch School of the Arts and began his career editing and producing commercials for some of the top brands in the country. Both he and his brother partnered in producing. Aman is the producer, Zeeshan is director, Two Gods, which is Zeeshan's first feature film with institutional support from the Sundance Institute, Tribeca Film Institute, the Ford Foundation, and many others. And we'll talk about Two Gods in this program. But before we do that, I wanted for us to just kind of start with the basic question about what is grief and what is grief in the age of this pandemic. This pandemic has caused all of us to experience loss. Certainly the disproportionate impact on African Americans, on Muslims, Black and non-Black, comprising essential workers in healthcare and transportation and so on. And for those of us fortunate to not have experienced loss of someone close to us, many of us have experienced a dramatic shift in how we live. So we have lost lives, and some of us have lost livelihoods, or at least those livelihoods have been put on some indefinite pause. And I also want to stop here and reflect that there is coronavirus, the pandemic, and then there's racism, the pandemic. And, you know, today we're talking about grief and the challenges with processing grief in this moment. And this has become really visceral for a lot of us in thinking about the racist killing of Ahmaud Arbery. And I don't like to say the killing of, we should just name it, the white men that hunted him down and killed him, right? And filmed it. And so I think as we talk about grieving, that is also something that is on many of our minds, certainly here, and I'm imagining in our audience as well. So we hope that this conversation about grief and how to process grief helps us in some way in processing that as well. So Dr. Rashad, I think, like I said, a good place for us to start is with some kind of, if not working definition of grief, a shared understanding of what grief is, what it looks like, what it feels like. How, you know, we say we suffered loss, but how do we know if we're grieving?
So first, Assalamu alaikum and Ramadan Mubarak to everyone who's watching. I think that's a great question. And it begins by understanding that there is a really broad definition. And that's grief is sort of the natural and unique response, right? So unique to each individual response to loss. And so you can imagine that those responses are going to vary according to each person. But typically what we find are what call these stages of grief. right? That there's disbelief, there's shock, there's anger, there's immense sadness over the loss. But there are also different types of grief. And, I'm really thankful that you lifted up the name of Ahmaud Arbery, because it's something I was struggling with all day, and even last evening, feeling all of the stages of grief that I just described. Just thinking about my 15-year-old son, and he came to me and said, "Have you seen these white men that killed this Black guy who was jogging?" And I thought, oh no, I wanted to kind of get to him first before he saw it. And I asked him if he'd seen the video. He said yes. And he said he watched it 5 times. And he said, because it didn't seem real. Like, how could they do that to him? And I wanted to cry. Like, I feel like crying now, because this is the kind of grief that's called disenfranchised grief, right? Where the loss that we experience isn't recognized as legitimate, because we're not recognized as legitimate people, right, with valid feelings and emotions, and it's not socially recognized, right? And so what I saw in my timeline was a lot of grief today. People describing the pain of either watching the video or not, the pain of being in this moment of crisis, and where survival is really at the forefront of our minds. And then sort of this arbitrary, random, traumatic reminder, right, of how precarious our lives are, even outside of a pandemic. And so understanding that grief is going to encompass the range of emotion that is connected to loss. And the other loss that I think we're also experiencing is, what is described as the loss of the assumptive world. All of the assumptions that we've had about what it means to even live as Black folks, right, in a pre-pandemic world, has been shattered, right? Because now what we're seeing is that you could just go jogging, right? You could just wear a face mask and be pulled over, right? And someone leans in, a cop pulls you over and says, "Well, where are you going?" And you're like, "Wait a second, you're not wearing a mask." So you're putting me at risk in multiple ways. And so I think for those who are experiencing something along the lines of confusion, anger, rage, disbelief, right? And even numbness, right? This feeling of like, I don't feel anything. That is all a part of the grieving process. And it becomes more complicated when your grief is associated with events that other people either disregard or minimize, or don't see as legitimate.
Thank you. Thank you for setting that kind of frame for us. Aman, your film, Two Gods, features many of the rituals that accompany death, right? They're very present in the film. Can you tell us a little bit about the film and how you arrived at the subject?
Sure. And to piggyback off what Dr. Rashad was talking about was, as a storyteller, one of the things that I like to do, my brother and I like to do, is really try to normalize a lot of these conversations. Instead of just keeping these things to ourselves, it's important that we talk about this in as public of a way as possible. And so as storytellers and filmmakers, we're always trying to tackle subjects and find people that really are on the ground that are talking about these issues. And so we put together a documentary about a Black American Muslim casket maker in Newark, New Jersey, that takes 2 young boys under his wing. And throughout this film, you learn about their journey and how they work together through that process. And so through the lens of death, he's teaching these boys that their own lives are worth living. And death is something that it can make people feel uncomfortable, makes people feel awkward and icky and weird inside, but it's an important part of life. Not to dismiss it, not to minimize or things like that, but it's important that we take the time and give ourselves a space to talk about these issues. And that's what we were looking to do with our film. Zeeshan, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add about the film or.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's normalizing these sort of conversations and understanding that death and life are intertwined with each other. So I think it was really important for us to give this narrative of these rituals of death juxtaposed with a coming of age story, juxtaposed with people struggling to kind of find their purpose in life, to overcome setbacks that they're facing. I think that is so important. And I think all of this, the hard part about grief is that life isn't on pause to grieve. Like you have to keep like living and going. And I think we wanted to have a film that had that energy, that momentum, to kind of showcase how intertwined those two spaces are, and to kind of normalize this understanding of grief and the rituals and spirituality and faith. They're all kind of intertwined in the daily fabric of our experience, both in the good parts of life and the difficult parts of life.
Now, while you both were working on this film, you both experienced grief very up close and personal. Can you tell us what happened and the way it impacted the work that you were doing on this project?
Yeah, so during filming this, we've been working on this film for about 4 or 5 years, and about a year and a half ago, our father died, and it's hard to lose any loved one, let alone your father. And it was just, there's just no way to prepare you for it. And what was interesting was, and Zeeshan, I know you have a lot to say about this as well, is as we were filming, because we had filmed it throughout our film, you get an inside look at janazas and body washings and things like that. We went from filming janazas to having to do a janaza and wash and prepare our own father. And so learning about this process as we were filming helped prepare us and doing it ourselves. And I think that's when we realized, you know, because our family was really overwhelmed, we realized that this film can be a tool to get people to normalize these things. You know, our family, this is the first time that we've had to deal with death in a very significant way, an immediate family member dying. My brother and I, we had to step up and say, okay, you need to wash, you need to do this, you need to take care of this. I'm going to call the imam, you need to do this, and we need to do this, and we need to do that. And we realized just how grossly underprepared most communities in this country are when it comes to death. Many families, if somebody dies, who do you call? Maybe it's a predominantly non-Muslim family and somebody Muslim dies. They don't know who to call. And for us, we saw an opportunity to really, with our film and in other ways, to normalize these things, because a lot of people, when they die, they don't know what to do, or they don't have these conversations in their home. So when they do die, the family doesn't know what to do. Do they want to be buried here? Do they want, what is happening with the will, and what is happening with this and happening with that? And for us, we realized from our own experiences that it was important to prepare a community. And Zeeshan, I know you had a lot to say about how this helped impacted our filmmaking in the process.
I mean, it kind of goes back to kind of what I was saying a little bit earlier. It was this this reminder that life is so out, it's not in our hands. Like we can't control it. I think I was making this film objectively. We're like telling through this lens. As a documentarian, you're objectively watching, you're observing, you're collaborating with people and telling their stories. And then for suddenly it to become so visceral and real to a daily experience it was quite surreal. It was hard to shift your focus, like to process grief and then try to make this creative piece that encapsulated it. I think what it's forced the editorial process of making this film was that grief is intertwined in the fabric of the filmmaking now, more so than I think ever before. It's interwoven in the scenes of our characters. It's interwoven in how we talk about the film, because we experienced such a pivotal loss, but also the film is about showing the beauty of these rituals. And it's also part of like the climate that we're in right now. I mean, it's part of the grieving process that a lot of people are going through, is like the loss of the touch, the physical presence of these rituals, I think is so one of the things that we were really inspired by. And I was able to kind of, there's so much about our film is about feeling death, like physically, like touching a body, washing them, preparing them, hugging somebody when they need to be hugged. Like the vulnerability of grief is so important. But I think we're in this climate right now where we have to kind of like reconfigure what grief means. So I think that is definitely something that has really shaped our artistic process as we've made this.
Can you talk a little bit more about some of the artistic choices that you made? For example, why shooting black and white, or some of the really close shots that really make you feel like you're right inside the room? And we're going to show a clip shortly, but if you can help set the stage with that.
Yeah, I mean, going, to the point of, telling this story that encapsulated, the rituals of death, grief, the spiritual practices of our faith, and also this kind of juxtaposition of this kind of coming of age film. You're kind of walking this tonal tightrope of how these two spaces are intertwined. And we actually found that to tell the film in black and white, to tell the film so closely, to tell it so softly, to showcase this portrayal of men of color, and this, to strip away the color actually, and to leave it with the characters, their lives, their feelings, their emotions, and their vulnerabilities, was actually purposeful in the craft of our storytelling. And we actually wanted that to be a way in which we were not projecting this artificial, not artificial, but just color into this world. We were actually trying to strip it away and leave these stories as they are, these feelings as they are, and these characters as they are. So I think that was really important to the artistic choices that we were making, because it really kind of encapsulated all of the themes that we wanted, and also like gave, I think also like separately, we wanted to tell a Muslim American story in an artistic way. I think the Muslim American stories lack, I mean, I think society has a hard time accepting Muslim American stories as artistic, as risk-taking. And I think we wanted to do something that would also kind of shake up the norm a little bit of what we expect, quote unquote, of a Muslim American story. Tell a story that's not political and tell a story that's human.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Yeah, and that's one thing that, just to piggyback off what Zeeshan was saying, is there's a lot of great films out there, and it's generally not a knock. There's important films about hate crimes in a post 9/11 environment, or stories rooted in immigration, but we wanted to tell a beautiful film about grown men talking about their feelings, and that's what we wanted to do with it. And so for us, our film is a political statement in and of itself. It's just that there can be narratives like that out there.
So let's take a look at a clip. Is there anything you want to do to set this up for us, or should we just play it?
You want to set up, Zeeshan?
Yeah, well, this is just a quick scene. You'll see our main character, Hanif, who's the older man, and the younger boy that he starts working with in this scene for Kwan. Just a little scene, and then some footage of the film that you'll see in this too.
Don't go that way, no?
I'm trying to turn around.
Yeah, but still don't go that way. Oh!
See? He told me to turn. He did. He told me to turn. Oh, baby. I got this thing here.
Right
I
here.
got this thing here.
No, don't go that way. Don't go that way. Today's my day off.
Okay, let's see what you working with.
Well, today's my day off.
Yo, boy,
Come on, today's my day off. I'm all by myself.
You is?
Yeah, my mom.
You ain't by yourself then.
My mom,
You with us?
My mom, my stepfather, and my brother went to a party.
Oh, for real?
Yeah, and I didn't want to.
You ain't want to go, right? What's that?
It's a kiddie party.
You a kid.
I'm a kid. I'm a grown man.
Yo, you a grown man? So you want to help me if I needed your help?
Yeah.
I need your help. Yeah.
You want any breaks to be bullied or something?
It's not a gun that you use to hurt people with, okay? So just be careful on how you're doing it. Hold that, don't shoot it. You want to make sure it's even, just like this, not shoot it. Push it out, take it off the board, now put it back down and shoot it. Make sure it's even. You can hold this board. Now look go there, see if anything come out.
No.
All right. How friends you hang around?
I really hang around my cousins.
Girls. There go girls. That's not a good answer. So when I saw you, who you was with?
Who?
At the park.
Oh, great.
So you be around girls?
Sometimes.
Sometimes.
Like right
Right there. Push your weight. Use your back arm and push. Don't let her lean up off you. Push, 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 push. Good job.
So Aman, this is not Janaza 101. This is not that kind of project. Tell us. I mean, I'm interested in some of those decisions of, like, again, some of the shots, but even more broadly. So this is set in New Jersey. This home is in New Jersey. This casket maker. And I wonder, in this current moment, have you talked to the people who are in the film? Just because, there was a recent New York Times story that looked at Brooklyn Funeral Home. And in that report, it said that the funeral home was used to doing 20 to 30 funerals a month. And now they're having to do 15 per day. So what has been the response, or how has the pandemic affected the subject of your film?
Yeah, so this is a documentary. It's a true story, and it takes place in East Orange, New Jersey, which is right outside of Newark, New Jersey. And yeah, so what we did was we followed up. Zeeshan and I went out there about a week and a half ago, just to check in how things are. And I think we all assume that things are going to be crazy, but until you see things with your own eyes, it is absolutely insane. And so those caskets that you just saw on the clip, they create caskets for pretty much all of New York City and most of Jersey. And they went from doing 40 to 50 a week caskets to all those areas to 40 to 50 a day. And it's just nonstop with caskets. And at the funeral home, we went there, it's just nonstop. And so there's been regulations in New York and New Jersey and in many states across the country where they're banning public gatherings. And so when someone dies, that's it. There is no janazah prayer. There is no washing. There is none of that, because it's public health and safety, and they can't do that. And so that's a really, really difficult time for families, because it's hard enough as it is to lose a loved one, but to not be able to do those janazahs and give your sister or brother that final goodbye, for lack of a better phrase, is really, really tough on any family. I can only imagine how difficult that is. And on top of that, funeral homes are so backed up. Sometimes it takes 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks after someone dies for them to finally be buried, just because they're so backed up. And Zeeshan and I, we went to a cemetery just to check, this Islamic cemetery, just to check things, just to see how things were going. And it's literally just an army of cars, people just waiting for like 3, 4, 5 hours just to bury their loved ones. And there's gravediggers there. They're doing the best they can. Everybody's doing the best that they can. It's not bureaucracy or anything like that. It's everybody just trying. But literally, I'm not trying to sensationalize, but bodies are literally piling up. There's bodies that are being stored in refrigeration units because people don't know what to do. That's how much this pandemic is happening. Again, I think we assume things are crazy, but till you see it with your own eyes, it's on a whole other level.
Yeah. Earlier you talked about wanting to normalize the conversations we have about death. And I think, in depicting the rituals, the very kind of the body washing and the casket making, almost in a kind of mundane way, as a sort of like, this is what I do every day kind of thing. I wonder how that helps us think about death as not so mysterious, not so spooky, not so overpowering, but something that is kind of part of the journey, right? And so I'm wondering, what are the kind of spiritual or cultural resources that you both have drawn on in thinking about and processing grief? And I have that same question for Dr. Rashad. I'm not sure if she disappeared on us, but when she comes back, we want to get her. Oh, there she looks like she's back. There we go. So we're gonna start with you, Dr. Rashad, because you are the psychologist here, and someone who works both at the intersection of spirituality and mental wellness. So I wonder if you can help us understand maybe some of the tools, whether they be clinical tools or spiritual tools, that you think would be really important for all of us to begin accessing as we try to process grief.
Yes. Well, first, I wanted to say I had the pleasure of watching the entire film, and I was struck by how gentle it was, like the tenderness in so many of the moments between Hanif and the boys. Hanif describing like his journey to becoming a casket maker, sort of this like very unexpected kind of path. And I also saw a lot of the scenes as kind of a metaphor for the loss of vitality, like the loss of so much innocence that you see with the boys as well. There's so much like playfulness to Hanif in the midst of, the death and the dying, and there were constant reminders of that. But for him to, I think kind of just be in there, sort of in the zone, and be able to pull, I think there's like a very charming sort of magnetic quality to his ability to even have those conversations, with Farquan, like, who you hanging out with? Like, I really love the sort of authenticity. And, as a segue into answering the question, thinking about sort of the need for acknowledgement and affirmation, right, of the grief that people are experiencing. That so often, people are really quick to say, everything happens for a reason. Allah is the best of planners. We're going to get through this. Just have faith and just keep your head up. And it's so much of it feels like hollow at times, because it really takes all of the air out of the moment that you're in, right? And says that you should be transported or transformed into a space where you can even accept that this is Allah's plan, right? Allah's plan does not preclude the anger that you have over that, right? It doesn't say now, just have this sort of quiet acceptance. And, I think we all would like to believe we would respond to death in that way. But I think the reality is, and that we know from even our tradition, is that there is immense sorrow, right? There is disappointment, there's devastation. And I think to first name all of the things that are happening within you, and for folks to give you space and, to put on pause their own anxiety, right? Because if you're someone who has lost a really significant person in your life, sometimes people don't want to ask how you're doing. Right? They're like, well, I don't want to bring it up, and it's so awkward. And what if they go on and on about how sad they are? Right? That's our own stuff, right? But when you have folks around you who will just say, I can't even imagine how hard this is. I don't even know what to say. Right? There's some comfort in people saying, this is hard, and I want to give you space to really talk about how challenging it is. So that I think that first point is the affirmation of the present and the acknowledgement of the difficulty, right? Inshallah, we'll get to this space of acceptance and of, of being able to embrace sort of all of the differences that death may bring, or that grief. But first, I mean, I think we have all experienced what it's like for someone to give us platitudes, and what it's like for someone to say, I'm just going to be here, right? Whenever you need, whatever you need. I have never experienced anything like this, so I can't even begin to imagine, right? Like that sounds and hits you very differently. And so, for those who are thinking about sort of grief in this pandemic, or, grief associated with now hearing about the murder of Ahmaud, to really be intentional and thoughtful about how you open up and expand the space for affirmation, and the things that you do verbally and non-verbally that sort of forecloses on the possibility of people being really honest about the place that they're in. I think just really briefly, kind of a spiritual sort of component to this is, for me, is turning to our text, right? And the verse and the chapter that stays with me is chapter 2 in Baqarah, verse ayat 155 and 156, in which Allah tells us, you will experience something of loss and hunger and sadness and, of your livelihood, right? But for those who are patient, who are steadfast, right, that there is reward. And so again, the patience and being steadfast and being resolute in the mercy of Allah does not, to me, that says, come with everything, come with all that you are. And I am here to listen. I understand, I am able to, I've already anticipated, right, those things that you will grieve. So talk to me about it. And so I think sometimes we're looking for like a formula, right? Like, what is the perfect dua that I can make in this moment? And, at times I'm like, just kind of freestyle with your Lord. Like, don't feel like you have to have this sort of canned, perfect, response. But, I think the moment when you're in sujood and your forehead is on the ground, right? And you're prostrating in front of the creator of all the world, talk to him, right? And tell him, this is what's hurting me. This is what's causing me pain. And I submit to you in this moment to be able to provide the comfort that I need.
Aman, tell me about the cultural or spiritual resources you've drawn upon. For example, what did you do the first time you heard or experienced death, growing up?
I think growing up, as a kid, and it's not a knock on anyone, I think death was portrayed to me as something really morbid, right? When it's evil and the boogeyman comes and takes you and that's it. Like, you're dead. But honestly, I'm biased because I'm from Ohio originally, and I'm a big Bone Thugs and Harmony fan. They're from Cleveland and my hometown, Columbus. And honestly, my first understanding of what death is was Bone Thugs and Harmony, The Crossroads, right? It literally talks about, in the song, going from one life to the next, and the toll that takes on people in this dunya, in this world. This song was written in response to the death of Eazy-E, who signed Bone Thugs and was very dear friends of theirs, and all these relatives and friends that Bone Thugs lost. But understanding that the crossroads, the intersection between the dunya and the akhirah, and I'm not making jokes. That's literally what the song is about.
Yeah.
It was the first time I truly understood that. And if you go back and watch the music video, it seems a little cheesy now with 1990s special effects, but like, death is literally walking around and taking people. Every soul shall taste death. And then what this guy does, he puts his hand on someone's head and people die. And so for me as a kid, as a 10-year-old, that was my first understanding of what death is, that this is a journey that we're on, moving from this life to the next. So thank you, Bone Thugs, for breaking that down for me.
That might be the first khutbah I've ever heard that uses Bone Thugs and Harmony. But to the imams out there, take note. If you need to do a khutbah on grief,
I'm telling you, slow down those lyrics. Slow down those lyrics a little bit and listen to them, because they're talking about grief and they're told that it takes.
Yeah. Zeeshan, how is the pandemic influenced, or has it, your approach to storytelling? What kinds of stories you want to tell now?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting time to be kind of thinking about creating artistic work. But I think for me, like my initial impulses, it's almost made me like recommit to those impulses and almost use that as my greatest tool as an artist, which is to tell stories that are nuanced, to tell stories that show the vulnerabilities of people that are have not been given that chance to show their vulnerabilities before. I think like that to me is really important. I think Dr. Rashad, what you said about like making sure, like, people are encountering things that they're not equipped with yet. They don't have the tools for it yet. They don't have the language for it yet. And I think in art, there's this really beautiful opportunity to kind of tap into the language that we don't have yet, like the kind of gut feelings that we have, the things that make us feel, the things that make us hurt, the things that make us desire, like all of those are things that inspire me as an artist. And I think continuing to tell narratives about those sort of stories, continue to tell them in ways that give beauty to things that deserve beauty, to give beauty to things that are complicated. I think that is something that pushes me, as a filmmaker, as an artist, and something that I'm going to continue to kind of seek. And I think it's something that we need now more than ever. We need stories of vulnerability. We need stories that feel soft. We need stories that feel beautiful, because I think so much of our everyday experience now is so surreal, so painful. So I think never before has the escapism of art been more important than it is now. And it's not just escaping in a cowardly way, it's escaping in a way that's going to heal us, hopefully.
But, I actually wouldn't call it escapism, right? I think it's so critical to how people are trying to process and make sense of the world. And so you have a song, you have a film, you have, someone singing, right? Like, I think that helps us also tap into parts of our brain that we might need, right? And that we might not access otherwise. And so when I'm watching sort of a black and white film, it's pushing me to think about the texture, right? It's pushing me to not just rely on the color you've given me, right? So you stripped it all away. And so now that art is saying, well, you need to also be creative, right? You need to also think, right? You cannot be a passive observer when something is hitting you so viscerally and is resonating so strongly. It's pulling you in and saying, well, now here's an opportunity for you to tap into those parts of yourself that also need to tell a story. But that artist, that creativity is sort of giving everyone else permission to do that. And in a really beautiful way, I think it offers a gift for when like our words fail, right? When we're like, I'm just so confused and overwhelmed. The art says, here's a way, here's kind of a portal, right? Into being able to then describe what you're experiencing when you don't really have the capacity to do it as best, that you might have anticipated you could in other circumstances.
I think those are all excellent points, and I want to make sure we have some time for questions. But before we go to questions, I wanted to give you all an opportunity to share with us maybe some initiatives you may be working on, and certainly what the plans are for the film. So I'll start with you, Dr. Rashad. What are some of the current initiatives or resources you are working to develop to help people process grief through this moment and beyond?
Yeah, so one of the efforts that I'm involved in is the National Black Muslim COVID Coalition. And it was launched in response to really a need for us to think about how this pandemic is impacting Black Muslim communities in particular. And so we actually have a webinar this Saturday. If you go to blackmuslimcoalition.com, it's called 5 Before 5. So kind of thinking about Black Muslim wellness during the pandemic in terms of, financial responsibility, thinking about kind of emotional health, spiritual health, and how prepared are we for the reality that we're in. Oftentimes, again, the grief will push us into denial. And sometimes the journey to understanding and processing what we're experiencing is just to acknowledge that it is, right? Instead of pushing away kind of the truth of the moment. So blackmuslimcoalition.com, with Muslim Wellness, where we've launched, it's been approved. It's called the Black COVID Survey. So if you go to blackcovidsurvey.com, we're wanting to gather information from Black communities across the country, Muslim, non-Muslim, but Black communities, with an understanding of religion and spirituality as being significant factors around coping and wellness, and Muslim Wellness, in collaboration with Black Muslim professor at the University of Maryland, have really wanted to be able to kind of gauge like a snapshot of the community in this moment and how it's impacting us, and for folks to be able to share a little bit about what's on their minds. So that's blackcovidsurvey.com and blackmuslimcoalition.com, and you can find out more also at muslimwellness.com.
All right. And Aman and Zeeshan, tell us, when will people be able to see your film, and what are your plans with the rollout for it?
So right now we're in midst of, we were in plans of doing a big film festival premiere, but obviously with COVID made us alter those plans a little bit. But we were set to premiere at Hot Docs International Film Festival in Toronto. And so for people that are based in Ontario province, Toronto area in general, you'll be able to go to Hot Docs' website. I'll post it in the comments on the Facebook Live to check that out. And so that's our film is going to be premiering virtually later this month. And we'll continue to do film festivals throughout the world, inshallah, this year. And then PBS will be airing our film, inshallah. We don't have a set date yet, but around this time next year. So you'll hear more about it as the date gets nearer.
All right, so let's see if we have any questions from the audience who's been watching. I
got to shout out Marguerite Hill. Her family's from Columbus. She mentioned that. And
okay.
She said that, what was it? Her cousin went to prom with Busy Bone.
All right, okay.
That's incredible.
This is like a full circle situation here,
it.
right? It's like this is the Bone Thugs and Harmony hour,
so I gotta give
which is all right. It's all right. Okay, so I see a question from Muhammad Ali asking, have you thought about, or have you been tempted to go back and adding to the film in light of the COVID crisis?
Do you want to take that one, Zeeshan?
Yeah, we're actually, we're currently working on, I think my brother mentioned we were out there about a week ago. We're currently working on making like a short film that features some of the characters in our film. And it's actually specifically around the experiences of one of our characters in our film, Khadija, who's one of the funeral directors, and kind of her experience. As a funeral director, you're a leader of a community, but like, how do you lead a community that is just going through such an incredible challenge at this point? And so I think we're trying to kind of center it on her experience in a more observational lens of like what is happening right now in the community. So that is definitely something that we're working on putting together right now. So hopefully we'll be able to have something out into the world soon that speaks to, I think, this important lens of like looking at the people who are performing these rituals, and funeral directors and casket builders. The grief that they're experiencing is so difficult to see, and it's important to share and showcase that even those people on the front lines are dealing with grief and processing grief in a way they never could have imagined before. So I think we're really hopeful that that opens up some conversation as well.
Yeah, and it's important to understand that these are frontline workers too. They're on the front lines every day, literally risking their lives. I mean, a lot of the people we met contracted COVID, took a rest, got better, went straight back to work. And that's just the reality they have to do, because somebody has to do this work. And it is one of the most difficult jobs out there right now during this pandemic. And I don't think we take the time to really understand that. And again, as I was saying before, I think we assume that things are crazy, but until you see it, until you really get the chance to understand it, it's on a whole other level. And so I think it's important when we talk about first responders and frontline workers. And of course, we got to give everybody their due that is out here grinding, during this pandemic. But I think very often people like this often get forgotten. And so for us, it's important to make sure that they're celebrated and honored as well for the sacrifices they're making.
And can I just, I'm hoping this is not too political a statement, but
go for it. Let's
like
do it.
a lot of sort of the immigrant sort of narrative is, we're doctors and we're on the front lines of this, pandemic. And so, Trump should not say anything Islamophobic because, look at the percentage of doctors in New York, for example. And I think there's something problematic about that framing because it is, those folks, again, who have the grief, which is often disenfranchised grief of those essential workers who are building the caskets, who are digging the graves, who are cleaning up, right, those rooms, those hospital rooms, the folks who are feeding, right, those who are on those other sort of front lines. And so I think there's a way that we diminish their labor, and we sort of minimize their contribution when we elevate sort of, well, if you're credentialed in this way, right? If you're sort of respectable and you can be used to sort of promote this narrative around, how much Muslims contribute to the fabric of this nation, I think it says to someone like Hanif, right, that we can't tell your story because you're not respectable enough, right? You're formerly incarcerated, that you're struggling with addiction, perhaps. So we're saying the people who are without, these are the folks who are running to the fire, right? And essentially, we're saying, please keep doing that, but we're not going to really talk about you because you don't really make for a good poster. You don't really make for a narrative that we can promote that is free of complication. So I think when we lift up their grief, I think we also need to kind of lift up the selflessness and how challenging and complicated and nuanced their lives are that sort of lead them to that point of washing a body so tenderly, right? And being able to go to sleep and wake up, right? Not knowing what you're going to face over and over again in that day. So I think if we have more ordinary stories that are complicated, it actually it lends depth and richness in ways that I think are necessary, especially now.
We have, I think, one more question, and I don't even know if you can do a short answer to this, Dr. Rashad, but it's, what are some tangible ways we can honor and move through our grief during this time?
So my short answer would be, you honor yourself by being honest, right? And thinking about, what am I feeling, right? Not what am I supposed to feel? What is the spiritually enlightened answer? What is the stoic, I'm doing just fine and I trust in the qadr of Allah. Again, I'm not minimizing or dismissing those responses. But at times people feel like they have to perform piety in these moments, right, of grief. And that robs them, again, of the space of being able to say, I'm struggling. I need my friends and my family and my community to kind of wrap their arms around me. I need them to allow me to sob. I need them to allow me to not have the words to share what I'm going through. And we begin that by, if you wake up in the morning and, kind of doing a pulse check, right? What is my temperature today, right? Am I angry? Okay, right? And these are all things that, Allah does not put conditions upon us when he says, come to me with whatever is challenging you. So we should not put conditions on our fellow believers, right, when they're also struggling. So honor the grief by being honest about all that it entails.
Well, thank you so much. And I thank all of you for your work, your creativity, your commitment, your activism, for helping to create spaces to allow people to process their grief, to have this conversation. There is no way that we could have completely exhausted this topic in this short time, but we do hope that, some of the points that we've touched on give people something to start or work with on this journey that we're all finding ourselves in. So thank you all again, Dr. Rashad, Aman, and Zeeshan Ali, for sharing your insight and your gifts with us this evening. We want to thank everyone who tuned in for this discussion and remind you that every Thursday during Ramadan and a few weeks after, at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, we will gather on Facebook Live with other Muslim activists, storytellers, and story changers to learn about their work and how we can all make a positive difference. Again, thank you all for tuning in. We wish you all a blessed Ramadan. And until we see you all again, stay well. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.